This is the Other 22 Hours podcast. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Other 22 Hours podcast. My name is Aaron Shafer-Haiss.
And I'm Michaela Anne. If you are brand new, thank you so much for being here. And if you're a returning listener, thank you again for coming back.
For those of you that haven't checked out the show, we like to think of this as the anti-album cycle podcast. So it's not going to be your typical music interview show where somebody shows up with a new record or a tour that they're about to leave on and they're trying to get press about that. We wanted to focus on the tools and the routines that our guests have found to keep inspiration and creativity and sustainability in their lives and their careers.
Between the two of us, Aaron and I have almost 25 years of experience in the music business. And in an industry where so much is out of our control, up to luck, up to being in the right place at the right time, who you know, we wanted to focus on the things that are within our control.
So with that in mind, we decided to invite some of our friends and some of our favorite artists on to ask them the question, what do you do to build sustainability in your life so that you can sustain your creativity? Today's friend is Mark Erelli. He put his first record out in 1997. He's released, I think he said 16 records with small independent labels and also by himself. And he's also been a sideman for other songwriters such as Lori McKenna and Josh Ritter and Paula Cole and Amy Helm. And he's had a really long, vibrant career.
Of our guests so far, Mark has had the longest career, so it was really interesting to talk about how sustaining this career looks over 25 years. We talked about aligning your ambition with your circle of influence and your purity of intention within your music. We talked about the value in learning from other musicians and friends by supporting as a side musician. One of my favorite things was touching on the ritual of live music performance.
Yeah, how that has potentially existed since before spoken language, where there is somebody that is producing the music, making the music, singing, playing, all of that, and then the audience and the ritual of both performing and listening really opened up both Michaela and I's minds. One thing that I think is a really cool thing that Mark does is every day he wakes up and he reaffirms his commitment to his career and doing what he's doing. And that also involves checking in with himself and the different metrics that he's set up for himself, both in his business and in his career, but also within himself. Check in with where he's at and how he's doing. And then actively choosing this career and this lifestyle every day is really great. We say this is the Anti-Album Cycle podcast, and maybe we annoyed Mark. He does have a new record out, and we didn't talk about it at all. But we had a really inspiring, really grounding conversation with somebody that has spent a lot of time doing this successfully. So without further ado, here's our conversation with Mark Erelli.
Thank you so much for being here. I was trying to think, you and I have met in person maybe once.
Yeah, maybe at like a Rockwood show in New York City. I couldn't remember where, but I think it was...
No, it was the Country Music Hall of Fame when you were playing with Lori McKenna.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
It was several years ago. I remember very precisely.
Yeah. And what's the NPR station in Boston? WMHB?
WUMB is the UMass Boston station. There's WBUR is the.
What's the one that's kind of... Oh, man, I'm going to mess this up. I think it's like on the south side, kind of out past Fenway, maybe, in that area.
Yeah, there's WGBH and WBUR are both out there.
Cool. I think I met you at one of those. I was playing drums with the Stray Birds.
Oh, cool.
And, you know, near the end when they got into like the tornado of having like a bunch of different drummers all of a sudden.
Yeah, fun.
I was one of those. So.
Where the folkies were like harassing the drummers, being like, you shouldn't be, you're ruining this band.
Oh, man, we played Lizard Lounge. Mm-hmm. I think on that same run, and we were standing, you know, in the parking lot afterwards, and there was a Stray Birds super fan sitting there in the circle with us, and he looks across me and asks Maya, he's like, does he ride in the van with you? And she's like, I mean, he's in the band. You know, he's like, so he plays every show, and they're like, he's in the band, and he just like couldn't grasp it. But I will say, like 2 minutes later, as the joint was coming around the circle, he passed it to me, and we became friends. So, you know, in the end, love triumphs, I guess.
Yeah. Just got to be persistent.
Yeah. Speaking of all that stuff, we're excited to have you today. And I think you started putting out records in 97. that correct?
Yeah. Wow. You really did your homework, because that's
So
that's the one before the 99 debut. So yeah.
you have the longest career that we've interviewed yet. We have plans to interview people with much longer careers, but we're excited to hear how you've navigated. And
man. How much time do we have?
You're still in it.
Oh, yeah. It's funny, specifically on that point. I remember as a young artist and as a young man, and as I've become increasingly aware as a young white man, I remember thinking, as I was getting ready to attack the world, that I don't want to survive. Anyone can survive. You just breathe and you eat and you're surviving. I want to thrive. I want to do big things. I want to leave something behind and make my mark and all this stuff. And now as a professional musician for just about 25 years, survival is, I can't even imagine a higher goal at this point. It's what I'm completely focused on at this point of how do I keep doing this and not just keep the hamster wheel going, but how do I keep doing this at a level that I feel artistically is getting deeper and deeper and better and better. As a younger person, I looked down my nose pretty strongly at survival. And now I'm oh my God, I should be so lucky. And I am. Perspectives have shifted.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I could say, I'll talk for both of us, that we've both are really starting to have that realization. We both went to way too much music school and all of that, so we were very solidly looking down our noses and we're no, we got this, we're gonna do this, thrive, achieve, and it's oh wow, there's so much achievement in just sustaining and keeping on and just being consistently creating over time and all of that. That's a huge accomplishment all on its own.
Yeah, and what that requires is a constant checking in with yourself and with the people that have to live with you and endure you every day, checking in about what do I need to keep doing this? Is that doable? Is that sustainable right now? Okay. Yes, great. Let's go do that. If it's not, what is? What can I do now? It's something that I have been wrestling with recently, this whole dichotomy of doing versus being. I am great at doing things. I am always doing a lot of things. I'm not so great at just hanging out, sitting around, doing nothing.
Yep.
Part of that comes from just doing what you love for a living, and I don't love everything about it, as I'm sure you don't, but parts that you do love, I'm always thinking about ways of how can I do more of that? How can I get to that space again? But the being part of it, I think that's what makes you a tolerable person to be around. But it also feeds the art too. Turn the Page, amazing Bob Seger song. I don't want to hear 50 years of Turn the Page. We've got Tonight. We've Never Get, Against the Wind. It's you can't just keep writing about playing music,
Yeah. That evolution of the perspective, I think, is something when you're starting out, you're okay, what are my needs? My need is to do what I love to do in life. So my main need is to succeed at playing music. And what you define succeed as, I think, is really based around that one need of I want to do well so I can keep doing this one thing. And then as you grow, you realize, oh, I have a lot of other needs in life. I need my relationships. Some of us need, I would argue most of us, need love and support. And love and support is an exchange that takes time and presence that is very difficult to have if you're only focused on the doing and the succeeding. When I was in my early 20s and I saw my life as a musician, I had a very one-track mind of okay, success is playing big theaters and having a tour bus and being really acclaimed and beloved. And I looked my nose down on people who were playing house concerts into their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And now I'm 36 and I'm you know what? If that's what I get to do the rest of my life, that's pretty beautiful. It's changed so much. I, of course, still have ambitions beyond that. But like you said, survival and just getting to do what you love in any room is such a privilege. especially in today's world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back to the whole notion of having been doing this for a little bit, there's always these metrics that you were mentioning, like the things that you measure how you'll be successful, when you attain this or that. I've now been doing this, unfortunately or fortunately, long enough to have seen entire metrics implode and disappear. They've gone extinct. They're like some species that we screwed over and it destroyed the ecosystem, and now they're gone. Those dreams are completely useless. They have echoes, and I still wrestle with them. I still wrestle with the lottery myth that there's going to be like this one thing that happens that's going to change everything. And I tell myself that I don't, because I tell myself that I get up every day and I put in the work, and I'm not just like buying a ticket and expecting something amazing to happen. But I still have that expectation because the older music business, that was a dream that they were selling. But that business does not exist anymore. It is gone. And I would argue that probably one or at least two other versions of the music business where I also readjusted and recalibrated my dreams and my metrics, those have also gone too. And 3 years after the beginning of the pandemic, I'm still trying to figure out like, what are the new metrics? And, for me, one of those interesting things was non-musical. It was once I was around a lot, like when the pandemic hit, I had to kind of explain to my boys, like, this is the most I've slept in one bed in my entire adult life. I've never slept in my bed for this long before, And it's weird because I kind of like it. But as I was around so much, people enjoyed having me around, even though I was not in the best frame of mind and heart, whether it was the pandemic or my eye diagnosis. I was not in a good space, and they still enjoyed having me around. And it was like, oh, okay, this is a new metric, And as a new mom, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it becomes more so as they get older and they start to get opinions and they start to use words. And it's like, oh, okay, this is a new metric. Like, be around enough so that people in your life that you love feel supported. If you took the average of a pendulum, it's at equilibrium. But at any given point in time, it's not looking so great. Sometimes it's way over here, sometimes it's way over here, but on average, it's at equilibrium. And so that's what I try and shoot for with varying degrees of success, trying to keep those pendulum swings as minimal as possible.
I like that analogy of a pendulum. I think of them as different sized bubbles that are floating around. And there's the life bubble, the family bubble, my career bubble, and if they're out of balance, the whole ship doesn't float correctly.
Totally. There's any number of different analogies. Just the people in your life, your partner or whatever, that's a big part of it. None of what I do or what I have done works without my wife. It just doesn't. Now, if I didn't have my wife, I probably would have made some different decisions, and who knows what that career would have looked like. I don't know. And there's no way to know. So it's no way to really, it's useless to contemplate. But I do know that the life that I have chosen is only as good and as rich as it is because of her. And if I had chosen a different person that wasn't as strong and wasn't as vibrant a spirit as Polly is, it wouldn't have lasted. I had friends that were divorced in my 30s, musician friends. So anyway, a little bit of a tangent there, but it's the other 22 hours.
No, that's the important part of this.
It's all of this. And especially us both being creatives and both trying to build congruent but different careers in this industry. I spent years on the road with other bands as a sideman, and now I produce records and I stay home. And that's been a choice and a shift that I was making even prior to the pandemic. And the pandemic just called my bluff. It's like, oh, you want to spend less time on the road? Here you go. How's that working out? But there's been a lot of scraping my knees. It wasn't just like, I'm in the van all the time, to like, oh, hey, now I'm making records. I'm staying here. There's been a lot of like, how many bills are due next week? Okay, cool. I can make that happen. Cool. And I wouldn't have been able to do that without Michaela on a very tangible level, monetary level, but also just like the support of making a massive shift in my career and approach to everything. And talk about different metrics. There's an entirely different set of metrics when you take being a sideman out of the equation and just step into producing and all of that. Just having Michaela's support and understanding of what this life takes has been massive.
I can imagine. My wife's very artistic and is very appreciative of creativity, and she has a lot of creativity that she brings to her work. She's in healthcare, but she's not a independent artist. And in some ways that works out well for us. In other ways, it's like a lot of communication goes towards trying to paint the full picture of what this creative life looks like and why it's good to do this in the greater context of our marriage. That said, I was terrified at the prospect of being with another musician as a younger person. I actually met my wife pretty young, so there wasn't a ton of this, but there were a couple times where there was like maybe another spark with another creative person in my life, and I like ran away as fast as I could. I was like, I just don't see how this is going to work. But now as I'm at this stage in my life, I know people that are dual musician couples, people like Jeff Foucault and Chris Delmhorst, who seem to manage it really well, and I'm just in awe of them. I don't want it instead of what I have, but I recognize that it's like there's a beauty there in that kind of give and take that is just required.
What was the fear when you were younger?
I think asymmetry was a fear. Security was a fear. Like, I didn't even think that I was necessarily going to be able to be a successful artist. I wasn't raised with that being an archetype. If it's almost an improbability, as it's been described to me by, my parents, how is like yoking my saddle to another creative, how is that going to work? Like, it's just going to make it even harder for me to succeed as an artist. So just saying it out loud now, it sounds very young and immature. But there's also the notion of who you are as an artist, like commercially in the image, and who you are as a person. They're not the same. The difference between those two is different for different artists. I think it's probably seems like it's not much of a difference for me. The artist is a better guy, frankly, than I am. But I think I worried about falling for their like artistic persona and then realizing that like, oh, they're not that person. And also they fell for my artistic persona and I'm not that person. And then what do we do?
That's so true. We started dating at 21, and I think I can safely say that neither of us thought that it was going to be a long-term thing.
No.
I was like, and it was like a decade of not thinking it was going to be a long-term thing.
Yeah.
And I think
it's a long time.
It's been a long time of like, only recently, I think we've been like, this is a long-term thing. Check this out. Wow, we're married, we own a house, we got a kid. This is a long-term thing.
We've been very honest with each other that we spent a long time being like one foot in, one foot out of our relationship, 100%. Living together, even getting married, because neither of us thought we would be the type of person that would find your partner young and be like, that's it. We're in a relationship forever, family first. We both were like, no, but we found each other. So I guess we're stuck, but it was a lot of push and pull for a long time.
That's funny.
I don't think, I'll speak for myself. I can totally relate to your feeling. And I think had I been a little bit older, we met in college, if I had been more fully formed as an artist, or even like past the starting line of my career a little bit, I don't know if I would have dated an artist. I was still, I wasn't. Not you. It's not nothing against you. It's just like it's exactly what you were saying. Like, I would have probably fallen for the outward persona, the artist image.
Yeah.
And Michaela and I met at a time where I met Michaela. That's also who Michaela is. You meet Michaela and you like meet her.
Yeah.
If you follow me on social media, there's not much distinction between myself and my art and what I put out there in the world.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, it's similar for me, but I've come to realize that the version that I put out there is the guy that I really want to be. And occasionally I am totally him and I crush it. And then there's many times that I fall short of his insight and his compassion and his hope, his optimism. But he's out there and I have to be him a lot. And so I have to practice adopting those mindsets. I kind of just hope that smiling makes you happy. Being that guy, maybe someday I become that guy.
This is a really interesting concept because it's like you see this very tangibly on social media. People just put out the highlight reels, but I've never really thought it because I'm not a front person. I'm not an artist stepping into that character, so to say. Is this something that's been like a very present thought of yours for a while?
It's been there, yeah, ever since the beginning. And I'll go back to how I met my wife, which, playing shows as a young guy, I think there's the stereotype of the musician where like, it's like, oh, you could have a lot of fun, but I never did that because of what I was saying before. I didn't want someone to fall in love with me, the musician, and then be incredibly disappointed by me, the person. When I met my wife, I was at a folk festival. I was at the Falcon Ridge Folk Festival. I was not performing. I was volunteering in the record sales tent. We struck up conversations and talked and met each other outside of my music, to the point where like I started to feel enough for her where it was like, okay, now you really need to hear my music, because now if you don't like the music, that will be a problem. So then, she did, and it seemed like she did like the music, and the rest is history, so they say. But I knew from the moment I saw her, I had literally 2 days before I met her, personally to myself, sworn off relationships. I was like, I am trying to be a musician here. I have a lot of work to do. I can't juggle all this stuff, like I'm done. I'm just going to go write songs. I don't know what I thought I was going to write songs about, like not interacting with other people, but I think I thought I was going to write songs about going on the road and that everyone was going to find those completely compelling. And that's kind of what I did at first. But no, when I met Polly, I was telling a friend of mine a story that she happened to overhear and kind of joined the conversation. And I turned and looked at her and I was like, oh my God, this is someone that I need to know. So it took a while for us to kind of introduce Mark the artist into the relationship, and he still creates problems in the relationship every once in a while.
Yeah.
But none of this would have been possible without her.
Yeah, I think that fear that you voiced of stepping back from relationships, you're like, no, I want to do the work. I don't have time for this. I have to do this. This is a very common thing. I've felt it. I know Michaela has felt it. I'm sure a bunch of our listeners can totally relate to that.
I've heard a lot of friends say it.
Yeah. When you finally were like, oh, there's something cool about this woman. Let me introduce Mark the artist. Did that change your process, your creative process? Did that change your viewpoint of your career? Like, obviously it worked out because you guys are married and have kids.
Yeah. I mean, it's working out is what I say. Like, I never refer to it in the past tense. And, this is not to emphasize the work that is required, but it is something that we choose every day. And it's the same with the art. Like, it's a way I choose to be every day. And my relationship is something I choose to commit to every day. Now, is it a challenge occasionally? I'm sure it's a challenge for the both of us. But I don't mean to overemphasize the work. I'm just highlighting the intentionality of it. It's actually, I find it a lot easier to just commit to one day or the present moment rather than like, we're going to be married for 50 years,
Yeah.
And you don't actually hear too many stories of artists that are married for 50 years. They exist, but I think it's because there's this kind of quiet daily rededication. That's the artist that I want to be. I don't want to be broken up. It's just not an option. It's not what I want. And I will do anything to prevent that. But when we have couples that get married, younger couples, and there's like advice that's asked for, or there's like a guest book or whatever at the wedding, like we always write like, choose each other every day and the rest will follow. That applies to being an artist too. And it applies to all the other things that you have to do those 2 hours of fun music every day.
Yeah.
You can't just choose those 2 hours. You really have to choose all the other stuff too.
Yeah, it's all the unsexy stuff that goes
so unsexy
behind the scenes. Yeah, that's the stuff that I'm always interested in. And Aaron and I doing this together, we have different things that we like to focus on, where I really want to focus on like all the emotional stuff and like, what are the hard things you've gone through and how did you get through it? And Aaron kind of keeps me a little, he's like, okay, we can talk about that forever, but also let's talk about like, how does that translate to like writing a song and recording and the next step. you know, you have your solo career and then you've also been a side musician for people like Lori McKenna and Josh Ritter. Before the pandemic, how much were you on the road and away from your family? And how much was it divided between side musician work and your artist work?
Yeah, I'd say as we approached 2019, it was probably half solo work, half sideman work. The sideman work was so great because I got to play with all these amazing artists. Most of them were friends that just hired me to be me on their gig. Occasionally, someone like Paula Cole or Mark Cohn I'd get to work with for a while and that didn't know me and they would become friends. But that sideman work saved my musical career. I flamed out pretty hard around 2004, which would have been my fourth record, and what it took to be on the road and draw audiences. And
what do you mean by flamed out?
As in just like, I don't know if I can do this. I'm working really hard. It's not going the way that I thought it was going to go commercially. Artistically, I'm loving everything I'm doing. I'm really proud of it. It's not selling like I thought it would. It's not even selling like some of my friends are selling who are on the same record label. So it's not like I can say like, well, it's just this is because I'm on Signature and I'm not on Sony. That was a really tough moment there. And that was when I started playing with Lori. I had done some sideman work before that on occasion with Chris Delmhorst and with Katie Curtis. But that's when I started playing with Lori, and it gave me a break from myself. And it gave me a break from whatever I perceived as my stumbling blocks or my challenges at the time. And then the energy would shift and the sideman gigs would dry up for a little bit, and it'd be like, all right, let's go back and rededicate myself to my own thing. But the main challenges that I had, aside from it not going the way that I thought or the way that people around me were like telling me it was going to go when I started out, there were a couple of them. One was in 2008 when I put out this record called Delivered, which came out like a year after my first son was born. And that was the last record on Signature Sounds. It was getting harder for them as a label to work with solo singer-songwriters. They'd been licensing my stuff for years, but I just wasn't making their money back. And so, you know, when I made my next record, like I always did, I just made a new record. You know, I'd say, hey, I got a new record. And they'd be like, great, let's find a time to put it out. This time they were like, hey, we can't do this anymore. And Signature was my community. I was one of the guys that the label said to new artists, like, call this artist and talk to him. He's been on our label for a long time. And I talked to Josh and I talked to Lori and was like, these guys are amazing. And they are amazing. But when I found myself kind of outside that circle, and at that point it was in 2010 when I put out Little Vigils and I had my second kid, where I was like, oh, now I have to figure out how to do this as an artist without a label and a very young child, two very young children at home. And I was really struggling with that. And did for some time, but the sideman work helped. You know, I kind of managed to keep putting out music, though there was my longest break between records right after Little Vigils when I didn't have a label and we had this young baby at home and I just didn't know kind of how to juggle everything. So I just stopped putting records out for 4 years. Which, you know, 4 years is not a lot of time between records for a lot of artists. But up until that point, I'd been Ani DeFrancoing stuff. You know, I'd been like every year and a half, every 2 years, every other year, like there's something.
4 years when you're living it feels like an eternity.
Feels so long.
Yes, it does, especially with the young kids where every day feels so long.
Yeah, exactly. I always use Lucinda Williams as an example because I think it's between her self-titled and Car Wheels, right? It was like a decade in there. And I look back at Lucinda and I think like she has like a massive body of work that she's put out there. But there was a decade in between those two records.
Her entire 30s, I think.
Yeah.
Wait, are you talking, so there was the record in between the self-titled?
You're right. Sweet Old World came out between her self-titled and Car Wheels.
Oh, okay.
And it was 8 years between Happy Woman Blues and her self-titled. So basically the entire 80s, she didn't put out a record.
Yeah, and that self-titled record felt very fully formed, you know? So
yeah,
that
I
is
think
a
that's
long
my
time.
favorite of hers.
I go back to Lucinda too because especially as a woman, I often think it's interesting to hear the differing relationship to time between different genders. But something I talk about with a lot of women is this feeling of, oh my God, we expire when we hit 40, that now we're not interesting. And Pete, the music industry isn't going to like us as much. We're not going to be as appealing if we haven't hit a certain level of success by then. And I struggle with it, but I'm like, I have to refuse to believe that and go back to all these other people who've proven that wrong. And Lucinda's one of those. And like, I became a Lucinda fan when I was probably 22 years old, was the first time I heard her. And she was in her 50s or 60s. And did I ever once think, oh, I'm not as into her songs because she's in her 50s? No, I just loved her songs. Yeah. And since then, I've seen her play live tons of times. I've spent my money on tickets and records. And that's as a new fan, a young new fan for a woman who's older.
I mean, one of the things that I am proudest of and most thankful for is that I don't spend most of my time hanging out playing music with dudes. I've mostly backed up and accompanied and worked under/behind female artists, whether it was Chris Delmhorst and Katie Curtis and Lori McKenna, or whether it was Paula Cole, a little bit with Amy Helm just before the pandemic. I got to see the behind the scenes struggles, and some of this stuff is exactly what you were talking about, Michaela. I mean, I'm complicit in it to an extent because I'm a guy and I benefit from the patriarchy in ways that they do not. But in my mind, I was also like working really hard to support and lift up these people and make them sound as good as I could possibly make it. And I felt like I was/am part of the solution a lot of the time, but I got to see the choices that they had to make specifically as women. And it comes to mind, I mean, Lori has turned down more than I will ever be offered as an artist. And I've seen her do it like that, not even think about it, because there was something with one of her 5 kids that she needed to be, or she didn't want to be away, or whatever it was. And I've taken a lot of career advice and career direction from watching her do that. And I have turned down things for the same reasons in my own life. And interestingly, it really unsettles people sometimes to see a guy do it. I think people expect the female artists, if they have children, to be mothers and to prioritize motherhood. But when a guy prioritizes fatherhood, there's this like full court press that happens of like, well, you can do, you can figure this out. You can just like, no, I can't. I have to be there.
Take care of him?
Yeah. I can't miss his 5th birthday. I have to be there for that.
I see something parallel to that because since our daughter was born, we'll tour as a family, but I won't play. And I'll go solely to be a dad. I'll bring a little mix rig and I'll work in the hotel room after that. But I'll just be there not playing. We're going to Europe in a couple months, probably right around the time that this episode will air. And I'm not going to play. I'm going to go and just be a dad and hang out and be there so Michaela can do her thing. And it blows my mind how many people are like, wow, that is so amazing. I'm like, is it? I'm just doing what needs to happen for my family and what needs to happen for Michaela. I'm the expendable one here,
Yeah.
She doesn't need drums on stage. Her songs stand up with her voice and her guitar. I'm going to make it worse. If I was the artist and Michaela was just traveling being a mom, people would be like, yeah, that's the family's traveling together. But because I'm the man that's just there to be a dad, they're like, oh, you're going to be a babysitter. And I'm like, nope, I'm going to be a dad. This is my kid. I'm choosing to be here. I also have to be here.
Yeah.
This is my obligation.
Yeah. I mean, that's partly the reason that we don't tour a lot as a family, because all that parenting falls on my wife. And she's already doing so much of it, even when I'm just doing weekends at home. It's just not fair, and it's just not a role that I want to reinforce if I can. The general point is that I haven't learned as much from watching guys as I have from watching female artists.
Going through that really painful time of your solo career didn't feel like it was working, and really that rejection, that feeling of exclusion is a really painful thing to process. And I think we all can process it in different ways. And to then go and support another artist or other artists in your side musician role, did you find that stuff inspiring and motivating? I know you said you learned a lot, but were there ever times that you also maybe struggled with envy, and how did you, work through that, if that ever was something that you had to work through?
Yeah, I mean, I'm human. The thing that I have been most in awe of or envious of is other artists' ambition. I've seen just people have ambition and express ambition. And I definitely wanted to do things, but they were never, or very rarely, did I express ambition in terms of like metrics. My ambition was I wanted to be able to sing a certain way night after night without losing my voice. I want to write I've never written this kind of song. I want to write that kind of song, and I want to write a really good version of it. I never really expressed ambition about, I want to play this room or I want to gross this much. And I think there's people in my life that wish I had expressed that kind of ambition, but I was probably too pure about it. And seeing other people being able to express ambition and also work as incredibly meaningful artists, I was like, oh, maybe I could have juggled those two things a little bit better. So yeah, there's definitely times when I have to take a deep breath and remind myself like why I'm there. And it also helps that a lot of times those people that I'm working with are good friends. I really want Lori McKenna to get everything that's coming to her. And I am proud of Josh Ritter as a friend, and I want him to have everything. And I don't feel like that means that I have to have less so that anyone else can have more or vice versa. And I've just learned a lot from watching people like that. But yeah, there's definitely times where I am in a room and I'm like, I don't think I can envision myself playing my own music in this room. I mean, I felt that way about the Ryman. I was there twice, once with Lori in like the first big public performance of Humble and Kind, playing the Opry as a duo at the Ryman, and then again playing the Opry as part of Josh's band, and thinking like, I'm never going to stand here. And when I did, inexplicably, several years later, when my song By Degrees got nominated for Song of the Year and I got to play it at the award show, the Americana Award Show, I mean, I almost was like, I still can't really believe that it happened. Not only have I never had that ambition, but the times that I've bumped up with being a part of those experiences, I've thought like, yeah, I can't envision how I do this for myself. Maybe I should get myself a vision board or something.
Well, do you think you can't envision it because you're afraid to let yourself want it or dream it, or because you don't see the steps from that moment to the next of how it would happen?
Probably a little of both. If you envision it and it doesn't happen, then you have a reason to feel like you've failed. You're also letting yourself completely off the hook. That's a double-edged sword there. But, just practically, like, how do you get from Passim to the Ryman? It seems impossible, and yet I've seen it happen many times over now. Yep. Maybe there's just a failure of imagination there, or there's just a willful turning away from commercial metrics, maybe as a response to that initial MTV dream that I grew up with dying. That's what we were talking about earlier, like that version of the record business. The music business does not exist anymore. That was my earliest experience as an artist, was seeing like the thing that you thought you were getting into go away. And then it's like, well, now what? And it's been many years of asking yourself, now what? Since I never thought about this before, but maybe that had more of a formative impact on me than I ever wanted to admit.
Yeah. I'm listening to you talk, and I'm caught back on when you said that your ambition has been around your voice or writing the best version of this song that you want to write. And that is 100% the soapbox that I will stand on all day in talking to artists that I work with or friends. It's like, there is so much in this industry that is outside of our control. No matter how hard you work. And did you grow up in New England? I'm picking up that maybe you grew up in New England. Yeah, I did as well. I'm picking up on that, like, do the work, grit your teeth, bear it, just do the hard work. That New England ethos.
Also, don't dream too big.
Exactly.
It's called being a realist. I'm just being a realist.
Who do you think you are?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But, when it gets down to it, there's a lot of hard workers that aren't able to bridge the gap between Club Passim and the Ryman. There's a lot of luck that's involved. There's also like being prepared when that opportunity arises. There's that whole thing. But in general, there's a lot of luck. There's a lot of things that are outside of your control with how many people listen to your record, the reach of your record, all of that.
Yep.
So I tried, probably annoyingly to Michaela, I'm always on the soapbox of like, what is in your control is like what you're creating, getting closer to your pure artistic vision. How much closer to that am I this year than I was last year? And those are things that I think as an artist you can tangibly control, and metrics that I think are realistic.
I couldn't agree more. I've always thought that, like, okay, at some point, if you're lucky enough to have people turning towards you and paying attention, you damn well better have something worth saying so that you're not wasting everybody's time. Because there's other people out here trying to do the same thing. So I've always conducted myself to the point of, if someday something breaks through, I'm going to have something to say. Now, By Degrees wasn't like a breakthrough in terms of money. I made no money. I gave all that money, however much it was, to gun control organization. But there was no commercial or economic breakthrough from that. But there was a point where I got a bunch of people to sing my song, and a lot of people heard it, probably more than anything else I've ever done. And I had something that I really believe in to say for that. And all the work that I had done up until that point prepared me for the fact that when it was time to stand on the Ryman stage, flanked by the only two people I'd ever played it before with, Josh and Lori, were singing my song. It was an incredibly meaningful moment. And my guitar strap broke. And my guitar crashed to the stage and broke as they were introducing me.
Oh my God.
No.
And I had this very specific stereo guitar setup. I couldn't just plug another guitar in. I didn't want to stop the show and like hold things up to get a new set. I didn't know what to do. We like plugged it in. It was still passing signal. It was still even in tune somehow, having dropped 2.5 feet. And I just put the guitar back on and I walked out and I sang my song in front of Bonnie Raitt and, all my friends and my colleagues and my heroes and the fans. None of that would have worked had I not done all the preparation every day up until that point. Prepared me for that. How do you explain that to a young artist? That someday you might be lucky enough to be in a situation where all this work that you put in, when it doesn't seem like anyone's paying attention, you're going to have to draw on it, and you're going to have to draw on basically all of it to hold your shit together and do your job. I mean, that's not a sexy thing to say to someone starting out. It's my soapbox too, man. I say to people, on the rare occasion anyone asks, I say, if you work hard every day for the right reasons, you will be successful eventually. The only caveat being, you don't really get to define what that success looks like. I'm a successful independent artist. Does it look like what I thought it would look like? Hell no. And I don't really know too many people where it does look like. I worked with Paula Cole for several years. She had massive hits. Her career to her did not look like what she thought it would look like when I was working with her. We had many conversations about it. So it doesn't really matter what your experience is. It never looks like what you plan it to be.
Yeah, no matter what level you get to.
Right? So like the best that you can do is to just control, as you were saying before, Aaron, you control the things that you can control, and that is the intensity and the quality of the work that you put in. And whatever comes from that is kind of what's supposed to come from it.
Yeah, and I think, again, to sustain and keep going, it's a lifetime of suffering if you let the outside or the result or the reception or lack of reception determine how you feel about your work, which I think is a lifelong journey for a lot of us. No matter how pure my intentions are, if I put out music and I don't get something or it doesn't get recognized in a way I hoped it would, and even if I like walk it through the logic that I'm like, well, it's not my ego, it's that I want that to be able to grow my audience, to be able to keep doing what I'm doing. It's not about just flattery, whatever, justification I can do. If I'm hurt by it, Aaron always brings me back to, do you like what you made? Do you like your songs? What else matters then?
Yeah, that's a really sage kind of reminder. And it's really easy to lose track of that. I mean, the entire music business is basically designed to distract you from that truth. Yeah, and it's funny, my career, people will frequently say to me, like, you've done so many different things. You've done Western swing, you've done a record of murder ballads, you did a lullaby record, this or that. And I'm like, I understand why it looks different to you, but at any given time, I was just doing the thing that I loved doing the most. In my mind, 13 times plus however many side projects, I've done the same damn thing. I've just done what I loved to do and what was interesting me and what was exciting me at the time. Not looking at what was selling and thinking like, well, I can do some version of that, or not looking at any other metric other than what is inspiring me right now. And maybe that's the part of the secret to longevity, is just really to the extent that you can. And I realize that there's a fair amount of privilege in that kind of mindset, but getting as close to it as you possibly can for the reasons you were just saying. Do you like it? I love all of it. Yeah. None of it was as successful as I thought it was going to be or hoped, I mean, truly, none of it. But I have since, learned, as the longer you stick around, you hear from people about, oh, I listened to this record of yours when I was going through a divorce and it really helped me. Or this record did this for me. Or this record was my record when I was going through this. You can't predict that. You can't know that. Those are beautiful markers of success that really don't register on a chart or in a review.
On a dollar sign or anything like that.
Yes, or on a dollar sign.
I mean, in a way, I meant that like in a business metric sense,
Yeah. I mean, you got to keep the lights on.
Yeah, to me, those kind of responses, that like really deep human connection, is priceless. It's worth more than all of that other stuff. Granted, I would love a platinum record. Great. That'd be cool. But that kind of connection, that kind of community building is what it's all about to me. I had a teacher in college that asked me the question, like, what was the first professional musician? I was thinking back to like, okay, New Orleans, like all that. He's like, no, it was a lute player in a castle in medieval times. The king and queen would hire a lute player to come and stand in the corner and play during dinner to like uplift the vibe in the room, and that's your first professional musician. Before that, you had, music to kind of like keep an oral history and all of that. But like essentially it's, you got kings and queens hiring basically like a jester to come in and play. But like from the beginning, people were paying for music to provide connection, to uplift emotions or vibe or anything like that. And so that's like where this all comes from, if you want to chase it back. And that was something that has stuck with me.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I resonate with that. The other thing, I guess this is kind of like a side companion to that, the way that I've really been helped in thinking about it recently, I got from a friend of mine who's a religion professor here in Boston University. And he came up to me after coming to see me at a show one night, and he's like, man, you like really held up your side of the ritual tonight. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, what you're doing is a ritual. It's like the modern version of this ritual that's been part of human nature since before religion, since before agriculture, since before modern society, maybe even since before, modern language. Like the humans gathered together in a cave around a fire, trying to impart information so that they wouldn't feel so stressed out about whatever the unknowns were out in the darkness. And that evolved into storytelling, as you were saying, like oral tradition, recording history, or imparting information about what was going on around you. And that evolved over the years into, among other things, what we do at a gig. And I had always struggled with how monumentally important what it felt like I was doing felt. I had always struggled to reconcile that with the fact that, again, who am I? Like, I don't feel like necessarily I'm so important, but this feels really important. What is it? And that my buddy gave me the language to think about it, is that we're reenacting this ritual, and it's not really about me, and it's not really about the audience, but those are the two components that are required in order to enact this ritual. And the ritual is clearly just basic, primary root function for us as a species. We did it before all those things I was talking about before in our evolution. We do it in wartime. We did it in the Great Depression. We did it in the Holocaust. It happens almost in spite of ourselves. And what we're doing now is the modern version of that. And for me, that kind of helps me take myself out of the equation a little bit. It's like, all right, well, I have a job to do tonight. And also, the people that come have a job to do. And when I'm browbeating people on social media to come to my shows. It's like, part of it is like, yes, I need to make a certain amount of money here and I want this to be successful. I want to go back. But the other part is you need to come because that's your job. Mm-hmm. And I do your job when I go to see other people. I'm not like saying that that's your job alone. I'm a fan too. I'm sure we all are. So it's like we all have a role here in preserving that ritual. And it's really hard. Sometimes it was really hard during the pandemic, but it's necessary.
I love that way of looking at it.
It saved
that
me.
Simple sentence of like, you did a great job of holding your end of the ritual up is just that
beautiful.
alone.
It was such a transformational way of thinking about it to me, because before that, I would have told you that albums are really where it's at. Like, you have control over making an album. You can really craft the statement that you want to craft, and they're around after you're gone. Gigs are ephemeral. They can be derailed by any number of things: illness, sports playoffs, other gigs.
Yeah.
Like, how could this possibly be meaningful on any real lasting level? That's why, because it is the ritual. The last 5 years or so since he said that to me, I've really fundamentally approached what I do with a very different mindset. And I found it really helpful, especially on the nights when, if you were to look at it from a business metrics standpoint, this is a failure. And I still have those nights all the time. I think we all have them a lot more than we let on.
Absolutely.
I think for sure. And I also think, again, the metrics of what a failure is are all relative, because someone who's aspiring to sell 100 tickets and they only sell 15, that's an epic failure. But somebody who's used to selling 1,000 tickets and they sell 500, that's a failure. It's hard to remember that these ideas of success and failure are relative. And when you focus on something like the ritual of the exchange, that's important no matter how many people are in the room with you to feel that. But that's a very pure, soulful approach that I think is necessary to keep going, but also really hard to maintain, because at the end of the day, we need the venues to want us to come back. We need somebody to want to book us. We need enough money to pay musicians so they'll keep playing with us. So it's, to me, this career is so much of always trying to balance the really deep, spiritual, soulful aspect of sharing music with the realities of what building this career is.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess, my time being the artist and also my experience being the side person, I feel like that's helped me walk that tightrope. Mm-hmm. But it is very clearly a tightrope. And I just thought about it this week. I just finished up the bulk of my initial album release tour. I got back yesterday. I had several times during the weekend where I thought, if I was a sideman on my gig, how would this feel? And I try and make decisions to the extent that I have the resources to make those decisions based on that. And that means sometimes losing money in the moment in order to support people in the way that you would want to be supported.
Exactly. Yeah. We are past our hour time frame, and we didn't even, as it usually goes when these conversations start, it always goes in these really beautiful, deep ways, and we didn't even get to some of the important things we wanted to talk to you about, like your eye diagnosis.
In some ways, it speaks volumes that stuff didn't come up, and there's still plenty to talk about. I love these kinds of conversations. I love the concept behind what you're doing. I think it's really important, shows like this and Basic Folk, for the newer artists coming up now who have it very hard. They need to hear this stuff.
I need to hear this stuff, and I've been at this for a while.
Yeah,
I was just thinking, it's one of those conversations that we have where it becomes hard for me to host, because you've said so much that has just completely expanded my mind and my viewpoint of what's going on, or put words to things that I've thought that has just been really inspiring to me.
It's funny, there's so many other things. I thought a little bit about, what do I do on the other 22 hours, I make my lists, I make all I had all these concrete things that I could have talked about, and somehow none of them really seem as important as just
that's why we say in our description of this podcast that these are musician-led conversations and not just an interview. It's really open for where the conversation leads to.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for doing this, and I'm just happy to be a part of it.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Other 22 Hours podcast. You can find more info on this episode, including links to things that we talked about, by going to theother22hours.com and clicking on episodes.
We want this show to be a resource for our community, from our community. So we'd love to hear from you about what works and what doesn't. Please let us know by sending an email to info@theother22hours.com. And we'll see you back here next week for another episode.